It's lovely. In fact, I think Linda would love one too. I'll give this to her next time she visits.
Oh, no, Mom, this one's for you. I can get Linda her own.
Those words came from Catherine, my daughter-in-law, her face drained of color, her hands shaking so violently she had to clutch her purse strap to steady them. And in that moment, I knew 3 things with absolute certainty. First, that candle wasn't a gift, it was a weapon. Second, Catherine had just tested whether I'd notice, whether I'd resist. Third, I'd passed her test by accident, and she was terrified. They thought I was too old to fight back, too tired, too trusting. They were wrong. Because what they didn't understand was this: aging doesn't take away your weapons, it just teaches you which ones cut deepest. And I was about to show them exactly what a retired school teacher with a sharp memory and a file cabinet full of receipts could do. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible, controlled, or silenced in your own home, you're not alone. Elder abuse thrives in silence. It feeds on our fear of not being believed. But your voice matters. If you're ready, share what happened to you in the comments below. Even if it's just your city, your state, that's a start. That's courage. Let me back up, tell you how I got to that moment, how I went from trusting widow to detective in my own home. It started with Sundays. After Richard died, Sundays became the only thing I could still control. Church at 9, coffee at 10, silence by 11. Predictable, manageable, safe. That particular Sunday in October started the same way. Morning light through the kitchen window, the kind that makes everything look softer than it really is. Then Catherine knocked. She never knocked anymore. She had a key. That's what worried me first. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was light, almost musical when she greeted me at the door. She walked past me into the living room. Her heels clicked against my hardwood floor. Sharp, deliberate. In her hands was a small candle, cream-colored wax in a glass jar. The label read Lavender Dreams. She set it on my coffee table with careful precision. "I know how stressed you've been," she said, her voice dripping with concern. "This will help you relax." She struck a match. The flame caught. And that's when the scent hit me. Sweet, floral, with something underneath. Something bitter that clung to the back of my throat. My chest tightened immediately. My breathing went shallow without warning. I gripped the arm of my chair and forced myself to smile. "That's very thoughtful, dear," I managed to say. But Catherine was watching me. Her eyes tracked my face, my hands, my breathing. She was studying me the way I used to study my 3rd graders when I suspected someone had stolen lunch money. Measuring, calculating, waiting for a reaction. "Just let it burn for a while," she said, softly. Too softly. 20 minutes or so. It works better that way. 20 minutes. I nodded, smiled wider. "Of course. Thank you, sweetheart." She lingered near the doorway. Her fingers twisted the strap of her purse nervously. Then came the question that changed everything. "Did it help?" she asked carefully. The scent. The way she asked it, so measured, so rehearsed, told me she already knew the answer she wanted. And suddenly, memory rose like smoke. The hospital room where my husband lay dying. The doctor's precise words about his sudden decline, the way everything had been explained so neatly, too neatly, and a smell, bitter beneath something sweet. I'd been too grief-stricken then to connect the dots, but I was connecting them now. That's when I said it, the words that saved my life. "It's lovely. In fact, I think Linda would love one too. I'll give this to her next time she visits." And watched Catherine's face drain of color, watched her hands start to shake, watched panic flash across her eyes before she could hide it. Because I'd just told her I was giving that candle to her own mother, her accomplice, or her next victim, or both. And she couldn't let that happen. After she left, quickly, nervously, making excuses, I sat in that living room as the October sun moved across the floor. My heart was pounding, my hands were cold, because I understood now what I'd been too numb to see when Richard died. This wasn't the first time. The bitter scent beneath the lavender, the careful questions, the measured dosing. Catherine had done this before, to my husband, and I was supposed to be next. But here's what Catherine didn't know about retired teachers. We're very good at spotting patterns, at noticing small details, at documenting everything. 40 years in the classroom teaches you that proof matters more than accusations, that patience beats confrontation, that the quietest students are often the most dangerous. I stood and walked to my desk, opened the bottom drawer where I kept old bills and receipts, found Richard's final medical statements, insurance claims, prescription records. I spread them across the table and started reading, really reading this time, not through the fog of grief, but with clear, cold purpose. The dates, the signatures, the small inconsistencies I'd been too devastated to notice before, refills that came too fast, care notes written in different handwriting, an insurance claim filed 2 days before Richard even entered the hospital. My hands stopped shaking, my breathing steadied, and for the first time since my husband died, I felt something other than grief. I felt clarity.
They thought I was weak, forgetful, easy prey, but I was a teacher for 40 years. I knew how to spot a liar. I knew how to gather evidence. I knew how to build a case so airtight that no one could deny it. And I knew, better than most, that revenge doesn't have to be loud to be devastating. Catherine had made a mistake today. She'd shown me her hand with those trembling fingers. She'd revealed her panic with that flash of fear. She'd told me everything I needed to know just by trying to take that candle back. And now I was going to show her what happens when you underestimate a woman just because she's old. I gathered the papers, filed them carefully in a new folder, and made a list. The pharmacy, the insurance company, the hospital, the medical records department. I had questions to ask, time to kill, and a promise to keep. I looked at the candle sitting on my counter, still, silent, waiting to be given away. To Linda, to Catherine's mother, to the woman who was either victim or accomplice. Either way, mentioning her name had been the right move. It had cracked Catherine's composure, revealed the fault lines in whatever plan she'd constructed, and fault lines, I knew from experience, are where everything eventually breaks apart. I smiled. Not a happy smile, not a kind one, the smile of a teacher who's just caught a cheater red-handed. The smile of someone who's been underestimated their entire life and has learned to use it as camouflage. The smile of a widow who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Because Catherine was about to learn something I'd taught 1,000 children over the years. Cheaters never win. Not when the teacher's been watching the whole time. And I'd been watching much longer than she realized. The first thing I did was nothing. And let me tell you, doing nothing is harder than it sounds. Every instinct screamed at me to call my son Michael, to confront Catherine, to dial 911 and tell someone, anyone, what I suspected. But suspicion isn't evidence, and evidence takes time. So I waited. I played the role they expected, the grateful widow, the aging mother who needed help with everything. I smiled, I thanked, I forgot things on purpose, and I watched. 3 days after the candle incident, Catherine came by again. This time she brought groceries, set them on my counter like she was doing me a favor. "I picked up your prescriptions too, Mom," she said, pulling orange bottles from a paper bag. "Dr. Morrison adjusted your blood pressure medication." I looked at the label. The dosage had changed. I hadn't seen Dr. Morrison in 6 weeks. "Oh," I said, keeping my voice light and confused. "I don't remember him saying anything about that." Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "He called it in," she explained quickly. "You probably just forgot. You know how you get." You know how you get. There it was, that careful condescension wrapped in concern. I nodded slowly, let my face show uncertainty. "I suppose you're right, dear." She squeezed my shoulder. Her grip was firm, too firm. "That's why I'm here," she said warmly, "to help you keep track of things." After she left, I called Dr. Morrison's office. The receptionist was cheerful, efficient. "No, Mrs. Wilkins, we don't have any record of a prescription change. Would you like to schedule an appointment?" I thanked her, hung up, and added that phone call to my notes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Richard, about his last 6 months, how he'd declined so suddenly, how confused he'd become. The doctors said it was normal, age, stress, natural deterioration. But now, lying in the dark, I remembered details I'd pushed away. The way Catherine had taken over his medications, organized them into those little daily pill boxes. How Richard had stopped recognizing me some days, would stare at me like I was a stranger. How quickly it had all happened. 3 months from diagnosis to death. The insurance company had called it a blessing, a mercy, no prolonged suffering. Catherine had nodded sympathetically and handled all the paperwork. I'd been too numb to question any of it. But that numbness was gone now, replaced by something cold and clear and furious. The pharmacy was my next stop. I went on a Tuesday morning when I knew Catherine would be at work, dressed carefully, put on lipstick, wanted to look competent. The pharmacist was a young woman named Sarah. She'd filled Richard's prescriptions for years. "Mrs. Wilkins," she said warmly, "how are you holding up?" I smiled, made small talk, then casually mentioned that I was organizing Richard's medical records for tax purposes. "Such a mess," I said, shaking my head. "I'm trying to match up prescription dates with insurance claims. Would you be able to print out his refill history?" Sarah hesitated, just for a moment. "That's usually something family members handle," she said carefully. "I am family," I said gently. "I was his wife." She nodded, typed something into her computer. "Of course, give me just a minute." The printout was 3 pages long. I thanked her, folded it carefully, put it in my purse, didn't look at it until I got home. What I found made my hands shake. Refills that came every 2 weeks instead of monthly, prescriptions filled in Richard's name that he'd never taken, overlapping medications that should never have been combined, and the dates. God, the dates. Every change, every increase, every new prescription, they all aligned with Catherine's visits. I spread the papers across my kitchen table next to Richard's medical files, and there it was, the pattern. Not random, not accidental, methodical. I sat there for a long time. The afternoon light moved across the floor. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock Richard's mother had given us 40 years ago. And I thought about that candle, about Catherine's shaking hands, about the bitter scent hidden beneath the lavender. She'd tested it on me first, to see if I'd notice, to see if I'd resist. When I'd given it to her mother instead, she panicked, because Linda wasn't supposed to be part of this. Or maybe she was. Maybe Linda knew exactly what her daughter was doing. Maybe they were in it together. That evening, my son called. Michael, my only child, the boy I'd raised to be kind and decent and trusting. Too trusting. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice sounded tired. "Catherine said you seemed confused the other day about your medications." I closed my eyes, breathed slowly. "Did she?" I asked carefully. "Yeah," he paused. "Mom, I'm worried about you, living alone, forgetting things." Forgetting things. Catherine's words in his mouth. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said softly. "Just getting older. You know how it is." "I know, but we think, maybe it's time to consider some extra help. Someone to check on you, make sure you're taking your medications correctly. Someone to check on me. Someone to control me. Someone to finish what they'd started." "Let me think about it," I told him. "Okay," he said, "but promise me you'll think about it seriously. We love you, Mom. We just want you to be safe." "We love you." God, how many times had I heard that phrase used as a weapon? I promised him I'd think about it, told him I loved him too, because I did. He was my son. He just had no idea what his wife was. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. I thought about giving up, about letting it go, about accepting that maybe I was wrong, maybe I was paranoid, maybe I was just a tired old woman seeing monsters where there were none. But then I looked at the papers on my table, the prescriptions, the dates, the pattern, and I thought about Richard's last days, how he'd grabbed my hand with what little strength he had left and whispered something I couldn't understand. I'd thought it was just confusion, the morphine, the dying brain misfiring, but now I wondered, had he been trying to warn me? Had he known? I made a decision that night. I wasn't going to confront anyone, wasn't going to accuse or argue or explain. I was going to do what I'd done for 40 years in the classroom. I was going to document everything. And then I was going to let the system do what systems do best, protect themselves. Because here's what I'd learned after 4 decades of dealing with bureaucracy. Institutions don't care about individuals, but they care deeply about liability. And what Catherine had done, what I suspected she'd done, left trails everywhere. Pharmacy records, insurance claims, medical documentation, signatures that didn't match, dates that didn't align. All I had to do was ask the right questions, to the right people, at the right time. I pulled out a notebook, started making lists, who to call, what to ask, when to ask it. I worked until midnight, my hand cramped from writing, my eyes burned from reading small print. But when I finally went to bed, I felt something I hadn't felt since Richard died. Purpose. The next morning, Catherine's mother, Linda, called. Her voice was sweet, dripping with concern. She wanted to come over for coffee, just the two of us, girl talk. I said yes, because I needed to see Linda's face when I mentioned that candle, the one I'd supposedly given her, the one Catherine had reacted to like I'd handed her a loaded gun. I hung up and smiled, because predators always make the same mistake. They assume their prey doesn't have teeth.
Linda arrived exactly on time. She always did. Punctuality was one of those virtues she wore like jewelry, visible, deliberate, meant to impress. She brought muffins from the bakery I liked, hugged me at the door. Her perfume was too sweet, the kind that lingers in your throat. "Eleanor," she said warmly, "you look wonderful." I didn't. I'd made sure of that. No lipstick, hair slightly messy, cardigan buttoned wrong. The performance had already begun. We sat at my kitchen table, the one Richard had refinished 20 years ago. Linda poured coffee from my pot without asking, like she owned the place. "Catherine's been so worried about you," she said, stirring cream into her cup. Her spoon clinked against the ceramic. 3 times. Precise. I nodded vaguely, sipped my coffee. "She means well," Linda continued, "but she says you've been forgetting things. Medications, appointments." Her voice was gentle, probing, testing. I let silence stretch between us, counted to 5 in my head. Then I said quietly, almost confused, "Did I ever thank her for that candle?" Linda's spoon stopped moving, just for a second, then resumed stirring. "Candle?" she asked. Her tone was light, too light. "The lavender one," I said. "She brought it last week, said it would help me relax."
I watched her face carefully. I gave it to you, I added. Did you like it? Linda's smile froze. Her eyes darted to the side, then back to me. Oh, she said slowly. Yes, it was lovely. Very thoughtful. She was lying. I could see it in the way her hand trembled when she lifted her coffee cup, in the way she suddenly needed to look at her phone. Catherine really does care about you, Linda said, changing the subject quickly. We both do. That's why we think maybe some extra help around the house might be good. There it was, the same script Michael had delivered. They'd coordinated. What kind of help? I asked, made my voice small, uncertain. Linda leaned forward. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. Just someone to check in, she said soothingly. Make sure you're eating properly, taking your medications on schedule. Maybe help with bills and paperwork. Bills and paperwork. In other words, control. I nodded slowly, let my shoulders slump. I suppose I have been forgetting things, I admitted quietly. Linda's face brightened. She reached across the table and patted my hand. It's nothing to be ashamed of, she said kindly. It happens to all of us eventually. Eventually. As if I was already gone, already incapable, already erased. I squeezed her hand back, smiled gratefully. You're probably right, I said softly. She stayed another 30 minutes, talked about the church bake sale, about her neighbor's grandson, about nothing important. But I watched her the whole time. The way she checked her watch twice. The way she kept glancing at my pill organizer on the counter. The way she asked, too casually, if I'd been to the pharmacy lately.
After she left, I locked the door, leaned against it. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. But rage is useless without direction. I'd learned that the hard way. So I did what I had been doing for days. I documented everything. Linda's visit, her questions, her lies about the candle, the way she and Catherine were feeding Michael the same lines, the way they were tightening the circle around me. That afternoon, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Margaret from church. She'd mentioned once that she used to work in insurance auditing. I'd never paid much attention at the time. Now I paid very close attention. Margaret, I said warmly, I need some advice. It's about Richard's old insurance claims. We talked for 45 minutes. She explained things in language I could understand. How to request documentation, what inconsistencies to look for, which questions triggered automatic reviews. Why are you asking, Eleanor? She said finally. Her voice was gentle but curious. I paused, chose my words carefully. I just want to make sure everything was handled properly, I said, for peace of mind. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I'll never forget. She told me firmly, almost protectively, if something feels wrong, Eleanor, it probably is. Trust your instincts.
The second call was to the insurance company. I used the number on Richard's old statements, waited through the hold music, 17 minutes. When a representative finally answered, I made my voice slightly confused, a little elderly, the way they expected me to sound. I explained that I was organizing my late husband's records, that some dates didn't seem to match up. Could they send me copies of all claims filed in his name? The woman was patient, professional. Of course, Mrs. Wilkins, she said, we'll mail those out within 10 business days. I thanked her, hung up, and added that call to my notes. For the next week, I played my part perfectly. I forgot appointments, mixed up days, let Catherine organize my medications into those little daily boxes, the same boxes she'd used with Richard. I took the pills in front of her, swallowed them with water. Then, after she left, I spit them into the sink, saved them in a plastic bag. Evidence. Every visit, she'd ask how I was feeling, if I was sleeping better, if I felt more relaxed. Her questions had patterns, timelines, expectations. I gave her exactly what she wanted to hear.
Yes, I felt foggy sometimes. Yes, I was tired more often. Yes, I was having trouble remembering things. Her smile would widen, her shoulders would relax, and I'd watch her confidence grow. Michael called twice that week. Each time his worry had deepened. Catherine was feeding him stories about my confusion, my forgetfulness, my decline. He suggested gently, lovingly, that maybe it was time to discuss power of attorney. Just to make things easier, Mom, he said, so Catherine can help with your medical decisions, your finances. My medical decisions, my finances, everything. I told him I'd think about it, that I needed time. Of course, he said, there's no rush. We just want to make sure you're protected. Protected. The word tasted like ash. The church friend who'd recommended the pharmacist, Dorothy, called one afternoon. Her voice was cautious, careful. She said slowly, weighing each word, "Eleanor, Sarah at the pharmacy mentioned you'd been in, asking about Richard's prescriptions." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "Just organizing records," I said lightly. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke more softly, almost conspiratorially. She told me seriously, Sarah noticed something. She didn't want to say anything at the time, but some of those refills, they shouldn't have been approved. The timing was off. I gripped the phone tighter. "Off how?" I asked quietly. Dorothy hesitated. Then she said carefully, like someone was calling them in without going through proper channels, using Richard's name but forging signatures. The room felt suddenly cold. "Did Sarah report it?" I asked. "She flagged it internally," Dorothy said, "but nothing came of it. These things, they slip through sometimes, especially when everyone assumes it's legitimate family care." Legitimate family care. The perfect camouflage. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Richard, about how I'd failed to see it, failed to protect him, about how I'd let them bury him without questions. But I couldn't change the past. I could only make sure it didn't happen again.
The insurance documents arrived on a Thursday, a thick envelope, official letterhead. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were 63 pages of claims, dates, procedures, medications, signatures. I spread them across my dining room table, cross-referenced them with the pharmacy records, with Richard's medical files. And there it was. The pattern wasn't just clear, it was damning. Claims filed before appointments happened, medications prescribed by doctors Richard had never seen, signatures that looked nothing like his handwriting. Someone had been systematically billing insurance companies for care that never occurred and pocketing the difference. This wasn't just about control or inheritance. It was fraud. Large-scale, methodical, probably repeated across multiple victims. And Catherine had done this before, maybe with Linda's help, maybe with others I didn't know about. I sat there as evening turned to night. The papers glowed under my lamp, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. I wasn't the first. Richard wasn't the first. We were just the latest in a long line of convenient deaths, and if I didn't stop them now, I wouldn't be the last. I spent 3 days researching Catherine's past. Not online, I'm not that kind of tech savvy, but I knew how to ask the right questions, how to listen for what people didn't say. Dorothy from church had a daughter who worked at the county clerk's office. I called her about something completely innocent, property tax records for my house. Then, casually, I mentioned I was trying to remember where Catherine had worked before she married Michael. The answer came back quickly, too quickly. Catherine had been a nurse's aide at 3 different facilities in 5 years. That's a lot of movement for someone supposedly dedicated to caregiving. I made more calls, quiet ones, to people who knew people. An old teaching colleague whose sister managed a nursing home 2 counties over. a church member whose nephew worked in hospital administration. Piece by piece, a picture emerged. Catherine had left each job voluntarily, no formal complaints, nothing on record. But there were whispers, patients who'd declined rapidly under her care, families who'd questioned medication schedules, insurance irregularities that were noted but never pursued. Nothing concrete, nothing prosecutable, just patterns. The kind that disappear when someone moves to a new town, a new facility, a new victim. Then Linda showed up unannounced. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was organizing my evidence when her car pulled into my driveway. I barely had time to shove the papers into a drawer before she knocked. When I opened the door, her smile was strained, tight around the edges. She said brightly, with forced cheerfulness, "I was in the neighborhood, thought I'd stop by." She'd never stopped by unannounced before. I let her in, offered tea. She sat at my kitchen table and fidgeted with her purse strap. Her nails were bitten short, the polish chipped. Money problems, I thought. That's what nervous hands like that usually meant. "Eleanor," she said carefully, "Catherine mentioned you've been asking questions." My heart rate sped up, but I kept my face neutral. "Questions?" I asked mildly. Linda's eyes darted to mine, then away. She said quietly, almost nervously, "About Richard's medical records? His prescriptions?" So they were communicating, comparing notes, getting worried. "Good. I'm just trying to understand his final bills," I said softly. "For tax purposes, it's all so confusing." Linda relaxed slightly. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. "Of course," she said soothingly. "That makes sense. It's just, well, Catherine and we've been talking about how we can help you more, make things easier." Here it comes, I thought. "We think it might be time to discuss some changes, maybe having Catherine handle your finances, your medical appointments, just to take the burden off you." Her words were careful, rehearsed. This wasn't a casual conversation. This was a coordinated pitch. I let silence stretch between us, watched her discomfort grow. Then I asked quietly, innocently, "Did Catherine help you with those things too?" Linda's face went pale, just for a second. "What do you mean?" she asked. Her voice was suddenly sharp. I blinked, made myself look confused. "I just thought, since you two are so close, maybe she'd helped you organize your own paperwork," I said vaguely. Linda's jaw tightened. She forced a smile. She said stiffly, too quickly, "No, I handle my own affairs." But her hands were shaking again, worse than before. And I realized something important. Linda wasn't just Catherine's accomplice. She was also afraid of her. After Linda left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, thinking about mothers and daughters, about loyalty and fear, about alliances built on quicksand. Catherine and Linda's relationship wasn't equal, it was hierarchical. Catherine held something over her mother, something that kept Linda compliant. I needed to know what. That evening, I called Dorothy again, asked her casually if she remembered Linda from the church potlucks a few years back, before Linda had moved to a smaller apartment. Dorothy's voice changed, became quieter, more cautious. She said carefully, as if measuring each word, "Linda used to volunteer at the hospital gift shop until there was some kind of incident." My pulse quickened. "Incident?" I prompted gently. Dorothy hesitated, then spoke even more quietly, almost whispering. She told me reluctantly, something about medication inventory, pain pills going missing. They couldn't prove anything, so they just asked her to leave, quietly. Medication theft, not proven, not prosecuted, but enough to ruin someone's reputation, enough to prevent future employment, enough to create desperate financial instability, enough to make someone vulnerable to blackmail. It all clicked into place. Catherine knew about her mother's past, maybe she'd even helped cover it up,
And now she was using it, keeping Linda compliant, keeping her silent. Linda couldn't report Catherine without exposing herself. They were locked together, a mutual assured destruction pact, except Catherine held the detonator. I spent the next 2 days watching them. Not physically, but watching the pattern of their behavior. Catherine would call Linda before coming to see me. Linda would arrive shortly after, asking the same questions in slightly different words. They were testing my responses, making sure I was giving consistent answers, checking for awareness. But they were also watching each other. I saw it in the way Linda's voice would tighten when Catherine's name came up, in the way Catherine's questions about her mother felt more like surveillance than concern. They didn't trust each other. They needed each other, but they didn't trust each other. And that, I realized, was the crack I'd been looking for. The next time Catherine visited, I played a small card. She was organizing my pills again, chatting about Michael's work, about the weather, about nothing. And then I said casually, almost absently, "Your mother seems stressed lately." Catherine's hands stilled, just for a moment. "Does she?" she asked. Her tone was carefully neutral. I nodded slowly, made my voice concerned, grandmotherly. "She was asking about money," I said vaguely, "about whether Richard had left me financially secure." Catherine's jaw tightened, her eyes went cold. She said lightly, but with an edge underneath, "Mom worries too much. She doesn't need to concern herself with your finances." The possessiveness in her voice was unmistakable. Your finances. Not ours, not the family's, mine to be controlled by Catherine alone. Linda was a tool, an accomplice, but not a partner, and Catherine wanted me to know that. That night I updated my notes, drew a diagram of their relationship, the leverage points, the fault lines. Catherine controlled Linda through fear and secrets, but Linda's presence made Catherine vulnerable, a witness, a liability. Sooner or later, under enough pressure, they would turn on each other. I just needed to apply the right pressure, at the right time. 2 days later, the mail brought something unexpected. A letter from the insurance company, not the documents I had requested, something else. A notice. They were conducting a routine audit of Richard's claims, requesting additional documentation. They needed original prescriptions, doctor's signatures, care notes, and they'd copied Catherine on the request. I stared at that letter for a long time. I hadn't asked for an audit, I'd only requested copies. But someone at the insurance company had noticed the same irregularities Margaret had warned me about. Someone had flagged the file. The system was starting to move on its own, and Catherine would know it. My phone rang that evening, Catherine's number. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. She said carefully, trying to sound casual, "Mom, did you get a letter from the insurance company?" "I did. Something about an audit?" Silence. Then Catherine spoke more slowly, more deliberately. She told me firmly, almost ordering, "Don't worry about it. I'll handle everything. I have all the documentation they need." I'll handle everything. Of course she would. "That's very kind, dear," I said softly. We said goodbye. I hung up, and I smiled, because Catherine had just made her first real mistake. She'd told me she had documentation that, according to the insurance company, needed to include original handwritten notes and signatures, documentation she'd had to forge, and forgery leaves traces I was about to make sure everyone saw. The insurance audit gave me cover, a legitimate reason to request every document, every record, every piece of paper connected to Richard's final months. I called the hospital records department, spoke to a tired-sounding woman named Jennifer, explained that the insurance company needed complete medical files, original care notes, admission forms, everything. She sighed, told me wearily it would take 2 weeks. I said that was fine, I could wait. Waiting, after all, was something I'd gotten very good at.
While I waited, Catherine's behavior changed. She came by more frequently, 3 times in 1 week. Each visit, she'd ask the same questions in slightly different ways. Had I heard from the insurance company? Had I sent them anything? Was I having trouble finding documents? Her voice stayed light, casual, but her eyes were sharp, watchful. She was trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I'd already shared. I gave her nothing, just vague smiles and forgetful confusion. Told her sweetly, like a confused old woman, "Oh, I'm letting you handle all that, dear. It's too complicated for me." And each time I watched relief flood her face. She thought she was still in control. Linda called twice that week, too. Her voice was different now, tighter, more strained. She asked nervously, speaking quickly, "Has Catherine been by recently?" "Yes," I told her, "just yesterday." Linda went quiet. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Then she said carefully, almost fearfully, "She hasn't mentioned me, has she? Asked about me?" "Should she have?" I asked, innocently. Another pause, longer this time. Linda said hurriedly, making excuses, No reason. We haven't talked much lately, that's all." She hung up quickly after that, and I understood. The alliance was fracturing. Catherine was cutting Linda out, or threatening to, and Linda was panicking. The hospital documents arrived on a Thursday. A large manila envelope, thick, heavy. I spread the contents across my dining room table. 67 pages. Admission forms, medication logs, care notes, progress reports. I read every page, twice. And there it was, the pattern I'd been looking for. Not obvious, not dramatic, just small inconsistencies that added up. Richard's admission form listed Catherine as primary caregiver. That part was expected. But the signature wasn't Richard's. Wasn't even close. The medication logs showed doses increasing, rapidly, within days. Care notes documented confusion, agitation, symptoms consistent with over-medication. But the notes themselves, they were written in 2 different hands. One neat, precise, professional. One rushed, careless, defensive. I pulled out Richard's old birthday cards, his handwriting samples, compared them to the consent forms in the hospital file. The signatures didn't match, not even remotely. Someone had signed Richard's name multiple times on multiple documents. Someone had authorized increases in pain medication, changes in care protocols. Someone had made decisions Richard never consented to, and that someone's handwriting appeared throughout the files. Catherine's. I sat back in my chair. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, from certainty. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't paranoia. This was proof, documented, dated, filed with state institutions. Catherine had forged medical consent forms, had falsified care notes, had manipulated medication schedules, and she'd done it all while wearing the mask of a devoted daughter-in-law. But the worst part came on page 43, a discharge summary from Richard's previous hospitalization, the one 6 months before he died, the one I'd barely remembered because he'd recovered so quickly. The attending physician's notes mentioned family concern about medication management at home, that Catherine had requested additional pain medication, that she'd been counseled on proper dosing, that there were questions about whether Richard needed that level of medication at all. The doctor had noted politely in careful medical language, family member appears to have difficulty accepting patient's actual condition versus perceived needs. Translation? Catherine was pushing for drugs Richard didn't need, and the doctor had noticed, had documented it, but hadn't stopped it. I kept reading, went further back, requested Richard's primary care records from the year before he died. Those took another week. When they arrived, the pattern became undeniable. Pharmacy refills that shouldn't have been approved, office visits Richard never attended, prescriptions called in by someone claiming to be his wife. But I was his wife, and I'd never called in a single prescription. I made a timeline, taped it to my bedroom wall where no one else would see. Each incident, each irregularity, each red flag. They stretched back 18 months before Richard died. 18 months of systematic, calculated preparation. Catherine hadn't acted impulsively. This wasn't opportunistic. She'd planned it, engineered it, executed it over time. And she'd done it so carefully that even now, with all this documentation, I couldn't prove intent. Just negligence, just mistakes, just a family member trying too hard to help. Unless someone looked at the whole picture. Unless someone connected the insurance fraud to the medical fraud to the forged signatures, unless someone noticed that this wasn't an isolated incident. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the months I'd missed, about the signs I'd ignored because I was grieving, because I trusted, because Catherine had seemed so caring, about Richard's last lucid moment. He'd grabbed my hand, squeezed it weakly. His eyes had been unfocused but desperate. He'd whispered something, 2 words I couldn't quite hear. I'd thought he was saying goodbye, or that he loved me, but now I wondered. Had he been trying to warn me? Had he known? The next morning, I went to the cemetery, stood at Richard's grave for the first time in months. The grass had grown over. The flowers I'd left in spring were long gone. I told him quietly, speaking to the headstone, "I know now. I know what she did." The wind picked up, rustled through the oak tree overhead. "I'm going to stop her," I said. "I'm going to make sure she can't do this to anyone else." My voice was steady, certain. "I should have protected you," I whispered. "I should have seen it." But regret doesn't undo the past. It only fuels the present. When I got home, Michael's car was in my driveway. He was sitting on my porch steps, waiting. His face was serious, worried. He stood when he saw me, said gently, with forced calm, "Mom, we need to talk." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice light. "Of course, sweetheart. Come in." We sat in the living room. He didn't want coffee, didn't want anything. He just sat forward, hands clasped, looking at me with those kind eyes that reminded me so much of Richard. He said carefully, like he'd rehearsed it, "Catherine told me about the insurance audit, about the hospital records you requested." I nodded, stayed silent. "She's worried about you, Mom. We both are. This digging into Dad's medical history, it's not healthy, Mom." Not healthy. "I just want to understand what happened," I said softly. Michael's expression softened. He reached over and took my hand. He said gently, with misguided compassion, "Dad's gone, Mom. No amount of paperwork is going to bring him back. Sometimes we just have to accept that things happen, that we can't control everything." Accept that things happen. His words, but Catherine's script. "Maybe you're right," I said quietly. He squeezed my hand, smiled with relief. "Catherine thinks it might help if she took over managing your accounts, just temporarily, to give you a break from all this stress." There it was. The real reason for his visit. Catherine had sent him. To convince me. To close the circle. To take control before I found anything else. "Let me think about it," I told him. He hesitated, then nodded. "Of course," he said, "but don't wait too long, okay? We just want to help." After he left, I sat in the growing darkness, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. I was running out of time. Catherine knew the audit was coming, knew I'd requested records. She was moving faster now, getting desperate. And desperate people make fatal mistakes, but they also take fatal risks. And I had no idea how far she was willing to go to protect herself, or how soon she'd decide I knew too much. That night, I almost gave up. I sat at my kitchen table with all the evidence spread in front of me. 67 pages of hospital records, 3 pages of pharmacy logs, insurance documents, timelines, notes, proof of everything Catherine had done. And I thought about burning it all. Because here's what nobody tells you about fighting back. It's exhausting. Not just physically, though that too, the late nights, the phone calls, the constant vigilance, but emotionally, psychologically. Every smile I forced, every confused look I faked, every time I had to pretend I didn't know, it was killing me, slowly, silently. And the worst part? I was doing it alone. I couldn't tell Michael. He'd never believe me, not without proof so overwhelming he couldn't deny it. And even then, would he choose his mother over his wife? Could I ask him to? I couldn't tell the police, not yet. Everything I had was circumstantial. Suspicious, yes, but not criminal. Not without someone willing to investigate, to connect the dots, to take an elderly widow seriously. And I'd lived long enough to know how that conversation would go. They'd smile, pat my hand, suggest I was confused, grieving, perhaps a bit paranoid, that Catherine was just a concerned daughter-in-law, that I should be grateful. So I sat there in the dark, staring at the papers, and I thought about Richard, about how he'd died thinking I'd let him down, that I hadn't protected him, because I hadn't. I'd trusted when I should have questioned, accepted when I should have fought, and now I had a second chance, a chance to make it right. But I was so tired, 78 years old, a widow, alone in a house too big for one person, fighting a battle no one could see, against an enemy everyone else thought was family. It would be so easy to stop, to sign the papers Michael wanted, to let Catherine take over, to fade quietly into dependency and eventually death. Easy, safe, expected. My hand reached for the papers, to gather them, to destroy them, and then I heard it. A car door, closing, softly, too softly. I looked at the clock, past 11. No one visits at 11, not unless they don't want to be seen. I moved quickly, shoved the papers into the desk drawer, locked it. Footsteps on my porch, quiet, deliberate. Then a key in the lock. Catherine had a key. She came in without knocking, closed the door behind her. The living room was dark. I'd turned off the lights when I started working, but I could see her silhouette in the doorway, could hear her breathing. She said softly, too calmly, "Mom, are you awake?" I didn't answer, held perfectly still. She moved through the house, checking rooms. Kitchen, living room, hallway. I stood in the bedroom doorway, watching her shadow move. She didn't turn on any lights, didn't call out again. She was looking for something, quietly, secretly. The desk. I watched her try the drawer, find it locked, heard her soft curse under her breath. She stood there for a long moment, deciding. Then she left, just as quietly as she'd come. The door clicked shut, the engine started, pulled away. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. Then I went to the kitchen and threw up. Because I understood now, truly understood. Catherine hadn't come to check on me. She'd come to search, to find out what I knew, what I'd collected, to eliminate evidence, or eliminate me. And the only reason she'd left was because she couldn't find what she was looking for in the dark. But she'd be back, soon. I didn't sleep that night. Sat in my bedroom with the door locked, the desk drawer key clutched in my hand. Every sound made me jump, every creak of the house settling. By morning, I'd made a decision. I couldn't wait any longer, couldn't gather more evidence, couldn't build a perfect case, because if I waited, I might not survive to use it. Catherine was escalating, getting desperate, getting dangerous. I had to move, now, even if I wasn't ready, even if the evidence wasn't perfect, because an imperfect chance at justice was better than none at all. At sunrise, I called Margaret, the church friend who'd worked in insurance auditing. My voice shook when she answered. I said urgently, unable to hide the fear, "Margaret, I need help, real help, and I need it today." She heard something in my voice, something that made her go quiet. Then she said firmly, decisively, "I'm coming over. Don't leave your house. Don't answer the door for anyone but me." She arrived 30 minutes later, let herself in with the spare key I'd told her was under the flower pot. I showed her everything: the hospital records, the pharmacy logs, the forged signatures, the timeline. She read in silence. Her face grew harder with each page. When she finished, she looked at me with something like respect and rage. She said quietly, with controlled fury, "This is criminal. Eleanor, this is prosecutable fraud, elder abuse, possibly manslaughter." "Can you prove it?" I asked. My voice was small, tired. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said carefully, measuring her words, "Not by myself, but I know people who investigate this kind of thing, Medicare fraud, insurance abuse." She pulled out her phone. "I'm going to make some calls," she said firmly. "But Eleanor, once I do this, once I set this in motion, there's no stopping it. This goes beyond you and Catherine. This becomes official." I thought about Richard, about the cemetery visit, about my promise, about Catherine's shadow moving through my house last night. "Make the calls," I said. Margaret spent 3 hours on the phone, sent documents, made connections. By afternoon, she had responses. A Medicare fraud investigator wanted copies of everything. A state elder abuse hotline had opened a case file. An insurance company fraud division was assigning someone to review. The system, the slow, bureaucratic, indifferent system, was finally paying attention. "It'll take time," Margaret warned me. "Weeks, maybe months. These things move slowly." "I don't have months," I said quietly. Margaret's face was grim. She knew I was right. She said seriously, protectively, "Then you need to be very careful. Don't be alone with Catherine. Don't accept anything she gives you. Don't sign anything." I nodded. "And Eleanor," she said, "you need to tell Michael, today." That evening I called my son, asked him to come over, alone, without Catherine. He hesitated. I could hear the conflict in his silence, but he agreed. When he arrived, I made coffee. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd sat with Catherine, with Linda, with all the lies. And I took a deep breath. This was the moment I'd been dreading, the moment I might lose my son, because I was about to tell him his wife was a murderer, and he would have to choose who to believe, his mother or the woman he loved. I pulled out the files, set them on the table between us, and I said quietly, with my heart breaking, "Michael, there's something I need to show you, about your father, about Catherine." He looked at the papers, then at me. His face was already closing off, already defensive. He said warily, with forced patience, "Mom, we talked about this. You need to let this go." "I can't, because your father didn't die naturally." The words hung in the air between us. Michael's face went pale, then red. "What are you saying?" he asked. His voice was low, dangerous. And I realized, too late, that I'd made a terrible mistake, because Michael hadn't come alone. I heard the front door open behind me, heard Catherine's voice, sharp and cold. "That's exactly what I'd like to know too, Mom. What exactly are you saying?" I turned slowly in my chair. Catherine stood in my doorway. Her face was calm, too calm, but her eyes were ice. Michael looked between us, confused, already defensive. He said quickly, protectively, "Catherine, I asked you to wait in the car." She smiled, didn't move. She said sweetly, with steel underneath, "I know, honey, but when I heard what your mother was implying, I couldn't just sit there." Her gaze locked on mine, cold, calculating. "Go ahead, Mom," she said. Her voice dripped with false concern. "Tell Michael what you're accusing me of." This was it, the moment everything could collapse. If I accused her directly, I'd sound paranoid, delusional, a grieving widow seeing monsters. Michael would defend her, would think I'd lost my mind, and Catherine would win. So I didn't accuse her. I didn't say anything at all. I just slid the hospital records across the table toward Michael. He looked down at them, then at me, his face uncertain. "What is this?" he asked, quietly. I said calmly, with no emotion, "Your father's medical records, from his final admission." Catherine moved closer. Her hand rested on Michael's shoulder. she said dismissively, like it meant nothing. "We've been through all this, Mom. The doctors explained everything." I ignored her, kept my eyes on Michael. "Look at page 12, I told him gently. The consent form for increased pain medication." Michael flipped pages, found it. His brow furrowed. "That's not Dad's signature," he said slowly. Catherine's hand tightened on his shoulder. She said quickly, explaining away, "Of course it is. Your father was very ill. His handwriting changed." I pulled out the birthday card Richard had written Michael 2 months before he died. Set it next to the consent form. The difference was obvious, undeniable. Michael stared at both documents, his face going pale. "Who signed this?" he asked. His voice was barely a whisper. Catherine's composure cracked, just slightly. She said sharply, defensively, "I did. I had power of attorney. Your father asked me to handle everything." "Show me," I said quietly. Catherine's eyes flashed. "What?" "The power of attorney paperwork," I said. "Show me where Richard signed it." Silence. Catherine's jaw tightened. Her hand dropped from Michael's shoulder. She said coldly, with venom creeping in, "This is ridiculous. Eleanor, you're obviously confused. Grief does strange things to people." But Michael was looking at her now, really looking. His voice was careful, controlled. "Catherine, do you have the power of attorney documents?"
She didn't. I could see it in her face, in the way she changed tactics. She turned to Michael, her voice softened, became pleading. She said desperately, playing the victim, "Honey, your mother's been acting strange for weeks, calling the insurance company, requesting records. She's becoming paranoid." "Paranoid?" I repeated softly. "Is that what you told the pharmacy, too, when they asked about Richard's prescription refills?" Catherine's face went white. Michael stood up, looked at his wife with something like horror dawning. "What is she talking about?" he asked. I didn't answer, didn't need to, because at that exact moment my phone rang. The timing was perfect, almost too perfect. I answered it, put it on speaker. A professional woman's voice filled my kitchen. She said formally, identifying herself, "Mrs. Wilkins, this is Jennifer Chen from the Medicare Fraud Investigation Unit. We have some follow-up questions about claims filed under your late husband's name." Catherine's face drained of all color. Michael stared at the phone, then at Catherine, then at me. The investigator continued calmly, reading from her notes. "Specifically, we're seeing irregularities in prescription authorizations and medical equipment claims. Can you confirm whether you authorized these purchases?" I said clearly, for the record, "No, I didn't authorize any of them." "And can you confirm," the investigator continued, "whether your daughter-in-law, Catherine Wilkins, had legal power of attorney?" I said she did not. Silence on the other end, then typing. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilkins," the investigator said. "We'll be in touch. You may expect contact from our office within 48 hours. She hung up. The kitchen was dead silent. Catherine moved first, toward the door. Michael blocked her path. His voice was shaking, not from fear, from rage. He said, low and dangerous, "Don't move." Catherine's mask finally shattered, her face twisted. She hissed at him, all pretense gone. "You don't understand. Your mother is losing her mind. She's making things up." But Michael was looking at the papers on the table, at his father's handwriting, at the forged signature. "Did you do this?" he asked. His voice broke. "Did you do this to my father?"
Catherine didn't answer. Didn't need to. Her silence was confession enough. She turned to me instead, her face contorted with pure hatred. She spat at me, vicious and unmasked. "You self-righteous bitch. You think you're so clever." Michael grabbed her arm, hard. "Get out," he said. "Get out of my mother's house." Catherine yanked free, stumbled backward. For a moment, I thought she might attack me, physically. Her hands were clenched into fists. But she saw Michael's face, saw that she'd lost him. She said viciously, as a parting shot, "This isn't over. You can't prove anything." Then she ran. The door slammed behind her. Her car started. Tires squealed. She was gone. Michael stood frozen, staring at the door. Then his knees buckled, he sat down hard, put his face in his hands, and wept. Deep, wrenching sobs, the sound of a man's heart breaking. I moved to him, put my hand on his shoulder, didn't say anything. What could I say? That his wife had killed his father? That she'd planned to kill me too? He already knew. The evidence was spread across the table. He just needed time to accept it. After a long time, he raised his head. His eyes were red, devastated. He whispered hoarsely, barely audible, "Did she kill him, Mom? Did she actually kill Dad?" I thought about Richard's final months, the rapid decline, the confusion, the forged signatures, the fraudulent claims, the medication increases. "I think so," I said quietly. Michael made a sound like a wounded animal. "Why?" he asked. "Why would she do that?" I pulled out the insurance documents, the ones showing claims for equipment never purchased, care never provided. "Money," I said. She was billing insurance companies for fake services, probably did it to other patients too. Michael stared at the papers, his hands shaking. "I brought her into our family," he said. "I married her. I gave her access to—" His voice broke. "You didn't know," I said gently. "I should have known," he said. "I should have seen it." I squeezed his shoulder, knew exactly how he felt. Guilt is a heavy thing, especially when it comes too late.
We sat there for a long time. The evidence spread between us. Finally, Michael spoke. His voice was flat, empty. "What happens now?" I told him about Margaret's calls, about the investigators, about the fraud division, about the system finally, slowly turning its attention to Catherine. "They'll want to talk to you," I said. "You were her husband. You'll be questioned." He nodded, looked at me with Richard's eyes. "I'll tell them everything," he said. "Everything I know, everything I should have seen." My phone rang again, different number this time. I answered it. A man's voice, official, clipped. He identified himself carefully, reading from protocol. "Mrs. Wilkins, this is Detective Morrison with the State Police. We've been contacted by the Medicare Fraud Unit. I'd like to come by and take your statement. Would tomorrow morning work?" "Yes," I said. My voice was steady. "Tomorrow morning is fine." After he hung up, I looked at Michael. He was staring at nothing, processing, grieving. "You should go home," I told him gently. "Get some rest." He shook his head, said firmly, protectively, "I'm staying here tonight, on the couch. I'm not leaving you alone." I didn't argue. Truth was, I didn't want to be alone either. Not knowing Catherine was out there, cornered, desperate. That night, neither of us slept. I heard Michael pacing in the living room, heard him crying quietly around 3 a.m., and I lay in bed thinking about what came next. The investigation, the interviews, the exposure. Catherine would fight back, hire lawyers, claim I was confused, senile, vindictive, but the evidence spoke louder than accusations, and I'd made sure the evidence was everywhere, in multiple systems, multiple institutions, insurance companies, Medicare, the hospital, all asking the same questions, all finding the same irregularities. Catherine could spin stories, but she couldn't rewrite recorded facts. Morning came slowly, gray light through the windows. Michael made coffee. We didn't talk much. At 9 a.m., Detective Morrison arrived. He was younger than I expected, professional, thorough. He spent 4 hours taking statements, photographing documents, making notes. When he left, he told me seriously, with quiet authority, "Mrs. Wilkins, based on what I've seen here, we'll be opening a criminal investigation. This goes beyond fraud. We're looking at potential elder abuse, possibly manslaughter." He paused, looked at me with something like respect. "You did good work here," he said. "Most people wouldn't have caught this, wouldn't have documented it." "I was a teacher," I said simply. "Documentation is what I do." Over the next week, the calls multiplied. Insurance investigators, Medicare auditors, hospital administrators, everyone asking questions, everyone finding problems. And Catherine fell apart. I heard through church friends, through whispered phone calls. She'd called Linda, screaming, blaming her, threatening to expose her mother's past. Linda had hung up, then called the police herself, offered to testify, to tell everything she knew. The alliance had collapsed, spectacularly. Catherine was alone now, facing investigators from multiple agencies, all because I'd asked simple questions, to the right people, at the right time. 3 weeks later, Catherine was arrested. Fraud, elder abuse, forgery, manslaughter. The charges were substantial, the evidence overwhelming. Michael called me when it happened. His voice was numb. He said quietly, still processing, "They're saying she did this to at least 4 other patients, before Dad. 4 others. 4 families who'd never known, never questioned, who'd buried their loved ones thinking it was natural, inevitable. Until now." I stood at my window that evening, watching the sunset, thinking about Richard, about justice, about revenge. People think revenge is loud, violent, dramatic, but the quietest revenge is the most devastating. Because I never had to raise my voice, I just had to let the system do what systems do best, protect themselves. And in protecting themselves, they destroyed her.
Sunday came again. Not the tense, watchful Sundays of the past months, not the performances or the pretending, just Sunday. Quiet. Mine. I sat in my living room with the morning light streaming through the windows. No candles, no manufactured scents, just the smell of coffee and the faint lavender from the real plant on my windowsill. The one I'd always had, the one that didn't hide anything bitter underneath. The trial was over. Catherine had pleaded guilty. Her lawyers had advised it. The evidence was too overwhelming to fight. Fraud, elder abuse, forgery, 4 counts of manslaughter. The judge had been thorough, harsh, had called Catherine's actions a systematic betrayal of the most vulnerable. 25 years, no parole for 15. Linda had testified against her own daughter, voice shaking, eyes down. She'd gotten probation, community service, her own fraud charges reduced in exchange for cooperation. I'd seen her once since then, at the grocery store. She'd turned and walked the other way. I didn't blame her. Some shame runs too deep for words. Michael came by every Sunday now, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, though I knew he still carried that, but because he wanted to, because we'd both lost Richard twice, once to Catherine's poison, once to the truth. And we were learning to grieve together, properly this time. He brought flowers today, sunflowers, Richard's favorite. We drove to the cemetery, stood at the grave in comfortable silence. Michael had replaced the headstone, added a line beneath Richard's name. Beloved husband and father, taken too soon, not forgotten. I touched the cold marble, thought about the last time I'd stood here, when I'd made my promise. I kept my word, I whispered. Michael heard me, put his arm around my shoulders. Dad would be proud, he said quietly. The interesting thing about revenge, real revenge, not the violent kind from movies, is how quiet it feels afterward. No triumph, no celebration, just resolution. The questions answered, the patterns exposed, the system finally doing what it should have done all along. People ask me sometimes, church friends, neighbors who've heard the story, they ask if I feel guilty for destroying Catherine's life, for sending her to prison, for breaking apart a family. And the answer is no, not even a little, because I didn't destroy Catherine's life. She destroyed her own, and Richard's, and 4 others before him. I just made sure everyone could see what she'd done. The house feels different now, lighter somehow, like a weight I didn't know I was carrying has finally lifted. I've started teaching again, not in a classroom, I'm too old for that,
but at the senior center, teaching people my age how to recognize elder abuse, how to document, how to ask the right questions, how to fight back with paper and patience instead of strength they no longer have. The classes are full, always, because there are more Catherines out there, more people who see the elderly as easy targets, as resources to exploit, and there are more people like Richard, like me, who need to know they're not powerless, that aging doesn't mean defenseless. Margaret comes by once a week. We have coffee, talk about the cases she's still working on. She's become something of an expert now, consults with investigators, teaches them the patterns to look for. She told me last week, with pride in her voice, "You started something, Eleanor. The state's created a new task force, specifically for financial elder abuse." I'd smiled at that, felt something warm in my chest. Not pride exactly, more like purpose. Richard's death had meaning now, had created change. That mattered. Dorothy still calls every few days, checks in, makes sure I'm eating properly. She'd been furious when she found out, had wanted to testify, to tell the judge exactly what kind of monster Catherine was. But her statement had been part of the record, her observations about the pharmacy irregularities, her willingness to speak up. It had mattered. Everything had mattered. Every small piece of documentation, every quiet question. That's what people don't understand about fighting back when you're old. It's not about one big dramatic confrontation. It's about 1,000 small actions, each one deliberate, each one documented. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. I look at my desk now, at the drawer that used to hold all the evidence. It's empty. Everything's been submitted, filed, used. But I've started a new file, a different kind. Resources, hotline numbers, legal advice, warning signs, information I share in my classes, that I give to anyone who asks. Because knowledge is the first weapon, documentation is the second, and patience is the third. And I have plenty of all three. Michael's started dating again, carefully, slowly. He told me about her last Sunday, a woman from his office, divorced, kind. He'd looked worried when he told me, like he needed my permission, my approval. I squeezed his hand, told him gently but firmly, "You deserve to be happy, sweetheart. Your father would want that. I want that." His eyes had filled with tears, but he'd smiled. "Thanks, Mom," he'd whispered. Sometimes at night I still think about that candle, about the moment Catherine's hands shook, about the bitter scent hidden beneath the sweetness, about how close I'd come to not noticing, to accepting it, to becoming another convenient death. And I think about all the people who don't notice, who don't question, who trust because trust should be safe, who die alone and confused, thinking they're losing their minds, never knowing someone's taking it from them. It makes me angry, still, but it also makes me determined. I'm 78 years old. I've buried a husband, survived a murder attempt, sent a killer to prison, and I'm not done. Not by a long shot. Because there are more Catherines out there, more victims, more families who don't know what's happening behind closed doors. And as long as I can hold a pen, as long as I can make a phone call, as long as I can teach one more person to recognize the signs, I'll keep fighting. Not with violence, not with vengeance, but with the weapons I've always had: memory, patience, documentation, and the absolute refusal to be invisible.
Sunday afternoon, quiet house, sunlight on the floor. I pour another cup of coffee, sit in Richard's old chair, think about the journey from that first candle to this moment, about the fear, the exhaustion, the moments I almost gave up, about the system finally, grudgingly doing its job, about justice delayed but not denied. And I think about something Richard used to say, back when we were young, when I'd get frustrated with difficult students or bureaucratic nonsense. He'd put his hand on my shoulder, smile that gentle smile, and he'd tell me calmly, with unshakable faith, "Eleanor, the truth always wins. It just takes time." He was right. It took time, took patience, took documentation and persistence and refusing to be silenced. But the truth won. And Richard can rest now, knowing I kept my promise, knowing justice was served, knowing that his death and his life mattered. The phone rings. It's Margaret. She has a new case. A woman from church. Suspicious circumstances. Controlling family member. The familiar signs. I grab my notebook, my pen, tell her firmly, ready to act, I'll be right there. Because this is what I do now. This is my purpose, my mission, my way of making sure Richard's death created something good. One case at a time, one victim at a time, one documented irregularity at a time. I hang up, stand slowly, my joints protest slightly, remind me I'm not young. But young isn't what this work needs. It needs experience, wisdom, the kind of patience that only comes with age. It needs someone who understands that the best weapons aren't always visible, that memory is sharper than knives, that documentation is stronger than fists, that silence, strategic, deliberate silence, can be the loudest weapon of all. I pick up my purse, head for the door, pause at Richard's photo on the mantel, touch the frame gently. "Another one, my love," I tell him softly. "Another fight, another chance to make things right." His smile looks back at me, unchanging, supportive. I can almost hear his voice, calm, proud. "Go get 'em, Eleanor." And I do, because aging didn't take my weapons away. It refined them, and they're still sharp. They'll always be sharp.